EVGA CLC 280 has already gone through our bench for thermals and noise testing, with the conclusion being that it served as a competitive option when matched against the NZXT X62 and Corsair H115i. The CLC 280 and 120 both try to land between their major competitors, offering comparable cooling and noise performance to NZXT's rivaled Kraken line, but with simplified lighting effects to help reduce cost. Today we're reviewing the CLC 120 from EVGA's new series. We've already posted a teardown of the cooler if you're curious about more, but before getting to that, this coverage is brought to you by Catalyst Energy Mints. A 3-pack of Catalyst contains the equivalent energy to over 21 energy drinks, and at just $20 it works out to be a much more affordable and portable option. Use code GamersNexus in the link below for 5% off. The EVGA CLC 120 is pretty straightforward. This is it. Versus the 280, it's all the same other than the size. So basically, if you saw our 280 review, the CLC 280, the feature set in terms of the RGB LEDs, the pump plate, the inside of it, the Asetek Gen 5 pump, all of that is identical. The difference is that this radiator on this one is 120 millimeters and the other one is 280. And of course, the fans are different as a result. This is a 120 millimeter fan. Its range maxes out at about 2,500 RPM, whereas the 140 millimeter fan maxed out somewhere around 2,200 RPM, give or take the usual percentage for manufacturing variance and tolerance. So we're really just looking at a smaller version of it, and that means that we're in the 120, 140 millimeter range for looking at competition. NZXT's Kraken X42 is a 140 millimeter competitor to this that is actually quite expensive. It's about $40 more. So the EVGA CLC 120 is priced at $90. The X42, which is a 140 millimeter cooler with way more RGB functionality, is priced at $130. And then Corsair has some flanking options. There's plenty of air coolers as well that compete with these smaller radiators, so keep that in mind. But for today, we're primarily focusing on the 120 and how it compares against its larger alternatives rather than looking at the air coolers. That'll come in a future video. So 120 versus the 240, 280, 140s, all of those will be the main content for today. Testing methodology, as always, is linked in the description below in the full article and written review of this. We've also already torn this down as stated, and you can find some photos of that there. For the testing, the very basics, you can find the test system and its specs in that article, but we're still doing the same second-to-second ambient logging using thermocouple readers, and then averaging out 6 cores of temperature data over about 1,000 cells to get the average numbers. We have overtime numbers. We do delta values for most of the computations, and that's pretty much the basics of it, and you can find the rest again in the article. As with last time, let's first start with just the EVGA CLC coolers. That'd be the 120 and 280s for temperature readouts, and then we'll add the others. We're seeing the EVGA 280 CLC at 1050 RPM outperform the EVGA 120 CLC at its maximum fan RPM of 2,500. And that's about a 1.2 Celsius difference between them. Keep in mind that our variance is about 0.5 C, so we're outside of the margin of test variance. Dropping down to a more reasonable fan speed, the EVGA 120 CLC at 1,500 RPM posts a load temperature of 50.92 Celsius delta T, now about 10 C warmer than the 39.5 C delta T 280 millimeter temperatures when at 1050 RPM fan speed. Finally, the 1050 RPM EVGA 120 unit operates with an idle temperature of 11.4 C delta T and a load about 57, or somewhere nearing 80 Celsius if we were to add ambient back in. Pretty damn warm at that point. If you're curious, we also tested the cowling depth with the 280 millimeter cooler to see if the fan casing made any real difference, and the short answer is no, it didn't. But you can find that in our 280 millimeter written review, which we'll throw down below as well. And just like last time, let's now add NZXT back into the results. NZXT's closest competition in terms of size is the X42, but the price is so much higher that they're not really head-to-head in terms of target market. The X42 at 1050 RPM outperforms the EVGA CLC 120 at 1500 RPM by 4 Celsius, give or take, showing a clear advantage in noise to performance from the extra radiator size and, of course, different and larger fan design. The X52 uses the same 120mm sized fans, but has 2 of them on its 240mm radiator, so that matters. We're able to run the X52 at 800 RPM and achieve a slightly better performance to noise profile than EVGA's CLC 120 at 1050 RPM, but again, you're dealing with a major price hike to the X52. Here's the chart with everything added in. The EVGA CLC 280 is still at the top and is still exceptionally loud. It's not until way down the list that we get to the smaller 120mm radiator, which makes its first appearance right around the 1700 RPM X42 NZXT cooler, where the EVGA 120 CLC operates at about 40.78 Celsius delta T. The more reasonable 1500 RPM version of our test places the EVGA 120 CLC at 50.92 Celsius delta T, only marginally better than the one air cooler presently on our bench. We'll have to add more of those soon, but again, future content piece for that. Finally, looking to the noise table, we see the EVGA CLC 120 landing between the X42 and H100i V2, both at 1050 RPM, when the EVGA CLC is running at the same fan speed. This makes sense since the H100i has similar 120mm fans. Strictly from a noise perspective, the performance to volume is better with the larger radiators, and by volume I mean noise, not size, but your cost also increases substantially. Moving to the EVGA CLC 120 at 1500 RPM, this is also where it's most likely to be used, we're resting right at around 40.7 dBA, comparable to the Dark Rock 3 at 2000 RPM and EK Predator 280 at 1400 RPM. The 2500 RPM EVGA CLC 120 is unbearably loud with its 53.9 dBA output, just like its neighboring 50 plus dBA coolers like, again, the EVGA 280 at 2200 RPM. EVGA CLC 280 makes a lot of sense in terms of the price and performance positioning of that cooler, which is, again, cheaper than NZXT's options. It's about $130 and a bit more than Corsair's competing option, but has some more LED functionality. But the CLC 120 is a much tougher sell, and it's for a few reasons. One of them, it's $90 and it's performing really not that great. It's about where a good air cooler would be, and those will generally be cheaper. It depends on what you're picking up. But the price compared to 140mm options from Corsair and NZXT coolers, although pretty competitive and cheaper in some ways, especially versus NZXT, it's just not a great position. You'd be better off picking up either a good 140 cooler, or maybe something that'd make more sense if you could fit it would be a 240mm cooler, because if we look to the Corsair H100i V2, which has been a strong competitor throughout the last year or so, even against the Kraken line, and cheaper by the way, the Corsair H100i V2 is priced at around $100. It's $10 more than this, and it performs better, and it's got a better price, better noise to performance profile, all that stuff for $10 more. So if you can fit the 240, that would be the way I would go rather than one of these in a 120 variant, unless you really like the look of that pump plate and you also can't afford or can't fit the 280mm alternative of this that EVGA makes. So they put themselves in an interesting position. You really should either go with a 140mm or larger cooler with the better performance to noise profile, or you go with an air cooler if it can fit in the case, which the only exception is going to be small form factor, and if the looks are what you want. So that's really all this one comes down to. Not nearly as exciting as the EVGA CLC 280. Performance isn't fantastic, but it's still overall a pretty good entrance to a new market for EVGA. The 280 is absolutely the one that they should push as their flagship and just kind of push that one off into a corner somewhere, because the 280 makes them look damn competent. It's their first venture into AIOs, and it's very competitive with the X52, the X62, and the Corsair H100i V2 and H115i V2 as well. It's competitive with all of those, and it's price competitive. So let's just forget about this one. If you are interested in the others, I'll have links in the description below for the 280 if you want to watch that review and learn more about it. Subscribe, as always, for more. Patreon link in the post roll video to help us out directly. Patreon.com/GamersNexus or GamersNexus.net to read the full coverage. I'll see you all next time.